Hey, what's up guys?
I'm Bronze.
I'm Zinc.
And welcome to Bronze Zinc with Mage Episode 1, What is Magic the Gathering?
So today we're going to be going over all of the basic concepts of Magic the Gathering, kind of just touching on a whole bunch of different things, and kind of leading up to what our saga is going to be like. So all the things we talk about today, we're going to be going over in depth in later videos. Hey, what's up guys? I'm Zinc. Today we're going to go through the basics of Magic the Gathering. Now we're going to start off with what is Magic the Gathering. Magic the Gathering is an incredibly complicated and old card game created by Wizards of the Coast, who also created the famous and very well-known RPG Dungeons & Dragons. Now today we're just going to go over the basics, and we really don't expect you to understand everything that we talked about. This is pretty much just going to outline the rest of the series. So if you don't understand, feel free to watch any of these videos over and over and over as long as it takes you. Also, practice. Practice, practice, practice is pretty much something we're going to be saying over and over and over again, because that's how you're going to get where you want to be. If you don't understand a concept, then watching these videos is going to be really informative, but probably not as good as just practicing yourself. So I would go ahead, pick up a deck of cards. You're going to make a lot of mistakes, but that's okay, because you'll get there in the end. Along with practice, you really need to figure out what drives you. For me, I really didn't find my passion for Magic until I realized the awesome potential for decks. And the way I did this was I watched high-level competitive play, and what people actually thought and created was amazing to me. I really didn't understand the explosive potential of Magic the Gathering. For dumping an entire hand turn 1 and then winning turn 3, it just wasn't even a concept in my brain before I saw that, and that's what really got me excited and on the path to being the player I am today. In Magic the Gathering, there are 7 different card types: land, creature, artifact, enchantment, planeswalker, instant, sorcery. Now the first 5 of these, land, creature, artifact, enchantment, and planeswalker, are all considered permanent spells, meaning that once they're cast and resolve, they stay onto the battlefield until destroyed or otherwise interacted with. Now, instants and sorceries are different. Once their ability resolves, they instantly go into the graveyard, which is just where dead spells reside. And then their effects go on, and then they're no longer tangible. All of these cards are considered spells except for land cards. Now, how do we cast a spell? First, we look in the upper right-hand corner of the card, and we'll see colored mana symbols and generic gray mana symbols. Now, for example, what if we wanted to cast Land Wells? We look in the top right corner and we see 1 green mana symbol. What is mana? Mana is the magical substance used in Magic the Gathering in order to pay for spells and activate abilities. Now, to get this mana, we get it from land cards. Each turn you can take 1 land card from your hand and put it onto the battlefield. Then you can tap that land, usually done by turning the card sideways to show that it has an ability that's been used, and produce 1 mana of its color. To explain tapping perhaps a little bit better, imagine that each time you see a tap symbol, really it just means that you use the card. So in the case of our lands, each land has the ability tap, produce mana. Now the tapping itself, turning it sideways, isn't really that important. What's important is that you symbolize both to you and the other player that you've used that ability. So in the case of our Land Worlds example, we have our forest, which has the ability to tap for green mana. We tap it, we use its ability until our next turn. We produce that 1 mana, and then we spend that 1 mana to cast our Land Wells right onto the battlefield. As we wrap up talking about land and mana, it is important to remember that there's 5 different colors of mana in Magic the Gathering: white, blue, black, red, and green, with their corresponding basic lands: plains, island, swamp, mountain, forest. Each of these is represented by a specific mana symbol, which will help you understand what color your card is and how to cast it. The goal in Magic the Gathering is to win, quite obviously, but how do you win? Well, the easiest way is by reducing your opponent's life total from 20 down to 0, by attacking them with your creatures, blowing them up with your spells, and just dealing damage to them through a whole bunch of fun ways. Now, the much harder way to win is by forcing your opponent to draw a card when he or she has no cards left in their library, which is your deck. Now, because this is more complicated and quite a bit harder and usually a lot more boring, We'll be just focusing in the next couple episodes on how to win with creatures and sheer force. A typical deck in Magic the Gathering will contain 60 cards with no more than 4 copies of a single given card, except for basic lands, which you can have as many as you want. I see people having anywhere from 18 to 26 to, who knows, maybe having a full deck of lands, which probably wouldn't work very well, but would be very amusing. Now, with that being said, sky is literally the limit on what you can do with these. There are so many different decks that I've seen. I've never even scratched the surface on how many different ways you can combine cards to make an awesome and possibly janky, but still hopefully worthy of playing deck. Now that we've gotten, well, the basics out of the way, let's talk about how gameplay actually works. The first thing to decide is, well, who goes first. And you can do this any way you want. Normally, people do high roll on dice, but you could do anything from who has the most fancy sock on to, well, who did their laundry last. You decide. Now, once you've decided this, each player shuffles their cards into their deck, then draws 7 cards. Once you look at those 7 cards, you then decide whether or not you want to keep that opening hand or not. Now, just for frame of reference, if you have 3 land in your hand, it's probably worth keeping. If you have no land in your hand, you literally can't pay for anything, I'd probably suggest not keeping. Now, what if you don't want to keep your hand? Then you do what's called a mulligan. You shuffle your cards back in your library, and you draw 7 more. They just recently changed mulligan rules, so as you search this out on your own, you may see a few different ways. We're going to talk about what's called the London Mulligan, which will be established fully when Core Set 2020 comes out in July. So what the London Mulligan rule says, you shuffle your cards back in, you draw 7. If you like what you keep, then you put cards on the bottom of your library equal to the number of times you mulliganed. Okay, so let's take a step back. If I didn't like my starting hand, shuffle them back in, draw 7 more. Didn't like it, shuffle them in, draw 7 more. Say I did like that one. I mulliganed twice. I take 2 cards from my hand, put them onto the bottom of my library, and that's what my mulligan is. Or, say for example, I drew my 7, liked what I saw, don't need to mulligan, don't need to shuffle, don't need to put any cards back. That's how gameplay starts. So now that you've mulliganed to the absolute perfect hand and you're going to demolish your opponent, let's get into actual gameplay. Now, for the sake of argument, let's just pretend that we went first, we did our laundry last, we win. So, gameplay starts with players drawing a card. Now, because we go first and it's the very first turn, we don't get a draw. That's the disadvantage of going first. You get to play first, but you also get to draw last. So, normally we'd draw, but we don't get to because we're going first. We have 3 land in our hand and 4 cards that are really inconsequential at this point in time. We, even though we have 3, remember, only get to play 1. So we play our land, we have nothing that we can play, so we pass the turn. We skip the rest of our phases, we have nothing we can do, it's our opponent's turn. So our opponent goes and draws, plays a land, does whatever they do, and passes the turn. During each of these turns, we have several different phases and steps. So, as it's our turn, again, at the beginning of our turn, we have what's known as our untap step. So remember, if you tap a card, you use it. So, if we tapped our lands to produce mana, to pay for spells, those are unusable until they're untapped, which happens at the beginning of every turn. Your turn specifically for your own cards. So our land's untap, we draw our card, we play our spells in our main phase, which is right after you draw. Then we go into our attack step. If we have creatures, we attack our opponents, we make them lose some life, we make them feel bad about themselves. Just kidding, don't make them feel bad about themselves. We always build people up in this business. After we've done, well, beating our opponent's face, we go ahead and go into our second main phase where we can play more spells, whatnot, maybe play a land if we haven't already. And then we go into our end step, kind of your cleanup step, just happens at the very end, hence the name end step. Then you end your turn, pass it to your opponent. Your opponent goes through untap, upkeep, draw, main phase, combat, second main phase, and then they end their turn as well. So essentially you could just go around and around in circles if nobody does anything, which hopefully you're using your steps and actually doing stuff, because it's hard to win if you don't play things. Now that we've talked about general gameplay, let's talk about specific ways to play the most amazing card game in the world. Now, standards of format with cards stretching back from the last 2 years. So each year, Magic comes out with different sets that are added to standard, and old sets are phased out. So, standard pretty much is a really good way to ease players into the game, as well as creating a very ever-changing and dynamic format. Modern stretches back 17 years and has very unique and awesome combos that usually have your opponents at your mercy by turn 3. Vintage and Legacy are very similar except for the ban list. Now we will get into that a little bit later, but each card format has different ban lists to help make the game a little bit more fair. Now, Legacy stretches back 25 years and is really powerful in the richness of the cards provided. Now, Vintage, on the other hand, also stretches back 25 years, but it pretty much has a very low amount of cards that are banned, which essentially means that by turn 0, you're already killing your opponent. Commander is a very unique style of playing, where you have a 100-card deck with no single card ever being repeated throughout that 100 cards. It's a very fun and complicated and awesome way to get introduced into the game. Pauper, on the other hand, may need a little bit of an introduction. Within Magic the Gathering, there are 4 different rarities: common, uncommon, rare, and mythic rare. Now, as it goes probably without saying, mythic rare is going to be a lot more powerful than common. So, someone had the bright idea of taking all of the worst cards in the format, all of the common cards, and saying, hey, you can only ever use common cards in this style of playing. Which still actually leads to quite powerful cards, but it's pretty interesting to see what people have done with the lowest of the low. Besides formats, you also have to choose your playstyle. There are 4 main playstyles: aggro, control, combo, and mid-range. And we'll go over all of them really quickly. Aggro, speaking of quickly, essentially wants to dump their hand as fast as they can and just beat their opponent to the ground before they even have a chance to do anything. So it's full of cheap spells, cheap creatures, and a fast-paced game. Control, on the other hand, wants to control the game. They don't want you to do anything. They want to destroy your creatures, exile your creatures, counter your spells. They pretty much say nope whenever you play anything, hoping to survive long enough to get out their big guns, and then you really feel scared. Combo decks are pretty unique in their objective. They have 3, maybe 4 cards that they're really looking for in their deck to really go off and kill you right on the spot. So their deck is full of a few key pieces, as well as other things that help get them their key pieces. Once assembled, you better just, walk out the door, because there's no point. They're going to play solitaire for approximately 15 minutes as they say, wait, I can kill you. I just found the combo. Now, mid-range is kind of unique in its playstyle. It wants to be fast, but not as fast as aggro, and it does want to control the board to a certain extent, but definitely not as much as control. It pretty much loves turns 3 through like 7. It wants to kind of stay there and beat you as quickly as possible, but with bigger threats than what aggro can produce. In Magic the Gathering, it is important to learn the basic rules, and also important to learn that every single rule has a unless a card says otherwise, because every rule can and will be broken at some point in your Magic career. Remember how I said that if you have no cards in your library and you were to draw a card, you lose the game? In fact, there are several cards that state the opposite. If you were to draw a card with no cards in your library, you win the game instead. Also, there are even cards that state that your opponents can't attack you, your opponents can't cast their spells. So many fun things. Like being able to take control of your opponent? Well, I'm pretty sure that there's a card that does that. Heck, there are pretty much cards that even state you can't lose the game, so you can't go wrong with that. There are so many different ways to put together a deck. That's why Magic is so much fun, because there's literally infinite possibilities in making these way fun and cool and interesting decks. Now, with there being so many possibilities of breaking the foundational rules that we will teach you, it is important for you to actually understand the foundational rules before you break them. So stick with us, stay with this saga, and we'll teach you how to play Magic the Gathering the fun way. And that's Zinc out. Hey guys, thanks for watching. Hope it was as much fun watching as it was to film.
So please hit the like button below, subscribe, and ring that bell. I'm Bronze.
I'm Zinc.
This is Bronze Zinc.